So when a learner comes to me and says, Erica, I feel plateaued, the first thing I ask them is, so you've reached a point where you can actually have conversations in Spanish. Felicidades. Reaching this intermediate level really takes a lot, and it is something to be celebrated. But how are you feeling about now? Are you feeling a bit stuck? A bit plateaued? If you're like many of my students and many learners who reach out to me every single week, you may be feeling a bit stuck in the same place. Now, this is very common at this point, but it is very important that we do move you past it. So by the end of this video, you'll know what is holding you back and exactly what you need to do to reach the next level of fluency. Comencemos, amigos. Hola, mis queridos líderes del lenguaje. Bienvenidos a otro video. Yo me llamo Erica Ray. En este canal les enseño las estrategias que me ayudaron a aprender español desde cero y que han ayudado a un sinfín de mis estudiantes a alcanzar sus propios objetivos con el idioma. Si eso les parece interesante, pues suscríbanse para no perderse nada. Guys, we're going to discuss three things: what the intermediate plateau is, why it happens, and exactly what you can do to move past it. So what is the intermediate plateau? Well, let's start from the beginner's perspective, right? So when you are a beginner, everything is new and fresh and exciting. You're learning all these words. You could probably literally count how many new words you're learning each day and each week because they're numbered, right? You're starting from scratch. You're learning how to put them together. And if you're being smart about the way that you're learning, you are using your Spanish at the same time that you are learning your Spanish. And so you're actually able to hang on to what you're learning and really have basic conversations relatively quickly. Also, at this beginner level, your expectations of what you should be able to do at this point and others' expectations around you are relatively low. After all, you are just kind of getting started. So there's no pressure. But later something changes. When you start getting to that upper beginner, intermediate level, you really start to see everything that you don't know. Your confidence can start to dip, and in spite of your best efforts, you may feel like you are not improving. You're making the same mistakes over and over again. Your conversations aren't really improving in quality, in accuracy. Your confidence is no better. Your listening comprehension may be a bit stagnant. You may even feel like some days your Spanish gets a little worse. Does any of this sound familiar? So why does this plateau happen? There are so many micro causes, and we could really take this in a lot of different directions. Even kind of those psychological factors that we hinted at before, coming to this point where you start to realize everything that you don't know, and you're coming off of that beginner's high. But after working with a lot of learners, if we could just kind of zoom out and look at the situation, what I have noticed is that ultimately it comes down to a lack of focus. Not knowing what to work on and how to go about working on that thing. So why is this even a problem? Well, imagine that you walk into a doctor's office and say, "Doctor, I'm not feeling too well. I want to feel better, and I just overall want to be healthier, so give me something." Is the doctor just going to pull out a prescription, jot something down, and hand it to you? Well, not if he's any kind of reputable healthcare professional, right? What he's probably going to do is ask you a few questions. What are your symptoms? What's wrong? In what ways do you want to improve? How do you want to feel better? Until he gets that information, he can't give you anything except for generic advice like eat well, balanced, exercise, and get enough sleep. In that same way, I can tell you, make sure, intermediate learner, it's more important than ever that you're exposing yourself enough to the language, getting lots of input. It's more important than ever that you're using the language a ton. You need to be speaking regularly. And also take care of your mental and physical health. That's very important. So you need to cover all of those bases, but many learners are covering all of these bases, and yet they still feel stuck. This is not enough. This generic advice is not enough to push them forward. So we have to do something differently. Think of a tree, and especially one of those trees with a heavy trunk, like an oak tree, right? It's a big oak tree. We can liken the beginner stages of learning a language to that first part of the tree that's visible, like that big trunk. Even though we know that underground, the roots are kind of going off in different directions, they're kind of all coming together into this one thing, right? This big trunk. And for a good part of that tree, up into somewhere in the middle, everything looks pretty uniform. You know, the trunk is just it looks almost the same the whole way up. You know, regardless of your reasons for learning the language and your ultimate goal, you have to start by learning some basic things. Now, the methodology that you use to learn those things matters, and that's a topic for another video. But every learner in the beginner stage has to learn how to put basic sentences together and the most essential vocabulary that they need to have the most basic and everyday conversations. This is the most common vocabulary that they're going to use for any future conversation as well. So everyone's journey, as far as what they need to learn, starts off in a very similar way. But then what happens to the tree? It starts branching out. Those branches are going into all kinds of different directions. And that's like your intermediate stage. And this is where a lot of people freak out. It's like, oh my goodness, I could go here, I could go there, I could learn this, I could learn that. There's so much I don't know. There's all these nuances of the language that I didn't even know existed. How can I ever learn all of that? Do I even need to learn all of that? I'm making mistakes all over the place, all over the branches. My branches are like different lengths and different thicknesses. It's just a hot mess. And so what the intermediate student typically does is they say, okay, I'm at this level, I need a course for intermediates. It's going to fix everything. And so they're taking intermediate classes, they're taking this intermediate course, but unfortunately, most of those intermediate programs are teaching in the exact same, very sequential, linear way as when they were a beginner. And it doesn't work anymore because things have changed. The language has opened up for you in such a way that it is branching out in different directions, and what got you here will not get you there. You have to take control over the situation. How do you do this? You do this by shifting your approach to a topic-based type of learning. At this point, learning is no longer linear. In fact, it's only linear for a very short time. It becomes cyclical. You focus on one topic and you move on to another. You can revisit these topics as often as you want because every time you go back, you just make them stronger and stronger. You only focus on one or two branches at a time. These branches can include grammatical focuses that you need to work on. And you can always revisit the branches where you've already been because every time you do, you're just gonna make them stronger and stronger and your tree healthier and healthier. But what you can't do anymore is go on just this very straight linear path, which usually involves learning more supposedly advanced words, learning more supposedly advanced grammar concepts, because then things get really, really lopsided. You have knowledge, but you don't have healthy conversations. You don't have a healthy tree overall. So you're basically visiting very common, very popular topics that you know you're going to need for everyday conversation, and you're revisiting them several times so they get stronger every time. This is a great approach, especially if you're learning kind of everyday conversational Spanish, which to a certain degree, all of us need to have that level of Spanish at least, right? If we want to have fluency with the language. But to make this so much faster and efficient, and especially if you're learning Spanish for a specific purpose, you need to find a way to diagnose your most immediate concerns and select from them and focus on those first. And the most immediate concerns will vary from person to person. I can't tell you what they are for you. In fact, in my free workshop, the Next 90 Days Spanish workshop, I show you several case studies of my students so that you can see what they were working on and how they accomplished their goals, because that's going to get the wheels turning for you. Sometimes we just need to see examples in order to internalize that and figure out what is most important for us so that we can set our own goals. So you can register for free for that workshop at ericaraelanguage.com/90days. That's going to help you get the ball rolling. Because the truth is, at this point, learner Susan may want to focus on a branch that has to do with relationship building so that she can have deeper conversations with her Spanish-speaking in-laws. And she may also need a branch that deals with reflexive verbs because that's come out in her diagnosis as something that needs work. It's probably not the only thing that came out that needs work. How many of us only need to work on one thing? But it's what she most immediately needs to focus on right now. Whereas learner John, who moved to Mexico, may have a completely different focus. Maybe his first priority is navigating the everyday situations that he's coming across, like navigating the Mexican markets, bargaining, that may be a new world coming from an English-speaking country, going to the bank, applying for immigration. And even that's a lot to focus on at once. So he'll want to just choose 1 or 2 branches at a time and work with those. He may want to get better asking questions and finding out information so that he can get exactly what he needs. So even within the things that he wants to accomplish, that's still a lot of branches. And we have to go even more narrow to have something to focus on first. So he may choose to start with Mexican market, asking questions. There you go. Whereas learner Tiffany may want to improve her healthcare vocabulary for her patients and her ability to give commands with the verbs that she knows, to give instructions and directions. The point is, at this point, you must choose a focus. And when you do, something incredible happens. You very clearly start to progress in that area, and you very clearly start to see your progress. It's very hard not to progress when all of your efforts are leading to these 1 or 2 things. And then something else wonderful happens. All of those other branches that you're not even focused on right now grow a little stronger. They grow a little thicker, because it so happens that the nutrients that are going over here to your focuses are nutrients that all of the branches actually needed. So even though some are getting a little thicker than others, you are constantly working on your overall language abilities at the same time. You're just doing so in a way where you can clearly see your progress and you will no longer feel plateaued. So when a learner comes to me and says, Erica, I feel plateaued, the first thing I ask them is, what are you working on right now? And 99% of the time, they cannot answer that question. They don't know what they're working on. And therein lies the problem. They're just working on their Spanish, but that's too broad. We can't work on our whole tree at the same time. So the questions that remain are, how exactly do we diagnose our issues and figure out our most pressing desires? And then how do we make a plan to accomplish them and implement that plan? I go into great detail about all of that in the free workshop that I mentioned, the Next 90 Days Spanish Workshop. So go ahead and register for a showing at a time that is convenient for you. You can go to ericaraylanguage.com/90days to grab a spot. At the end of that workshop, you'll know exactly what branches to start with in your personal case and how to go about accomplishing your goals step by step. Again, that's ericaraylanguage.com/90days. I'll see you there.